Hi, welcome to Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and here we are at the end of another month, which means it is time to do a monthly wrap-up. So today I'm going to be talking about the 10 books that I read in March. And I will put them all right here. They are shown in order in which I read them, but when I talk about them, I will be ranking them. So I will start with the one I rated the lowest, and then get to the one I rated the highest. And this month, I didn't rate any book below a 3-star, so even the books that are like on the end of the list, I didn't hate them. Like, I gave them 3 stars. So honestly, it's a lot of books this month that were kind of middle of the road, where like I liked them, but I didn't love them. And so there's like 4 books where like their rankings are kind of interchangeable, and I had a hard time knowing where to put them. And there's also a couple books on here that I know people would like to see higher, but they're kind of rated lower than people would like to see them, because one book in particular, I haven't heard anyone say anything negative about, and yet it's not as high for me as it is for others, basically. But again, just because I'm rating it lower, again, it's like nothing below a 3-star, but just because I'm rating it lower than other people, it doesn't mean you shouldn't try them out, and it just didn't touch home for me, or it wasn't akin to my sensibilities, or just wasn't my taste for one reason or another, which a big thing which I've talked about is characters are so important when I read a book. I need to feel invested in these people and intrigued by them and want to know what's going on with them, and just I need to feel connected to the characters in some way. Like, even if I don't like them, I need to want to be reading about them and to understand them to some extent. So yeah, anyway. If you have seen my other monthly wrap-ups, you know how this works, but the book that I have for the best book of the month, that one will go head-to-head with whatever the reigning champ is of 2022, and as of right now, A Power of the Dog won for January and February. So we will see if this month's highest-rated book will be even better than Power of the Dog, or if Power of the Dog will continue to be the champion for 2022 so far. So if you want to, you can comment down below which of these books you think was rated the lowest and which one was rated the highest. I will say Misery was a reread, so that does not count because I already knew I loved that book. And so I won't be ranking it because it would rank number 1. But it's one I read last year and I already knew I loved, so I won't be counting that in my ranking. So excluding Misery, which one do you think was the best book that I read this month? And to kick things off, I'm actually going to mention a DNF, which wasn't listed because I didn't finish it, but that was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I posted a video last month about Verity, which I did not like. So I posted a rant review video talking about why I didn't like it, and someone in the comments said that I should try It Ends With Us, which I have heard about because Verity and It Ends With Us are the 2 most talked about Colleen Hoover books. And so I did try it out. I made it to chapter 3. So I was in chapter 3 when I decided to stop. So it was fairly early on. But the reason I stopped was because I just didn't find myself caring what happens to the characters. And also because there's just so many books that I'm so excited to read right now. And I was like, why am I spending time reading a book I'm not excited or not into when there's so many books I want to be reading that I'm super excited about? I felt like I was wasting my time in some ways. I still might come back around to it, so don't write any spoilers down below because I still may end up reading it because I have it on my Kindle, so we'll see. Maybe I'll get to it in April instead. But to get right to the 9 books for this month, again, because Misery doesn't count. So number 9 on the list is Horsemen Pass by Larry McMurtry. This book is a coming-of-age story. We follow Lonnie, who lives on this cattle ranch with his Uncle Hud, his granddad, his grandmom, his housekeeper, not his, like their housekeeper and cook, as well as other cowboys that work on the ranch. And I enjoyed this one. It was a pretty short read, and so that made it easy to read, even if maybe I felt like things were a little slow. It wrapped things up pretty quick because it was a short book. There were definitely some intriguing things going on with this ranch, like a sickness going on with the cattle, and then you have Hud, who is a presence on this ranch, whether he's there or not, because he is just very overbearing, if that's the right word. I don't know, he doesn't really care about people, and he just kind of does what he wants, and he can be mean, and he just does what he wants, essentially. And it was reminiscent of Phil and The Power of the Dog to some extent, with how, Phil just had this presence, whether he was there or not, and, he can spot someone's weaknesses and use that against them, kind of a thing. Hud wasn't quite to the extent of Phil, but he did remind me of Phil in some ways. But yeah, so I enjoyed this book. It was Larry McMurtry's first book, and so if there were things that I just didn't love about the writing style, I'm still interested in reading more McMurtry because this was his first. So he, obviously improved as the years went on. So I will read more of his, and considering this was written when he was in his early 20s, it is impressive. But yeah, so this was an enjoyable enough coming of age story. And yeah, coming of age stories don't tend to be my preference, my preferred genre. However, like What's Eating Gilbert Grape is coming of age story, and I really enjoyed that one, and there's been some others. So sometimes I'm like surprised and I'll find myself enjoying one. Whereas this one, like it was fine. I gave it 3 or 3.5 stars, so it was good, but I just didn't love it. Anyway, moving on to number 8 on this list is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and this is one that is very special to a lot of people, and it's just special to them. And I get it. I get why it would be, but it just didn't fit my tastes in certain ways, even though I love sci-fi. This one, again, I think a lot of these, it's just personal preference, where just this writing style, it was funny and it was witty, sci-fi mixed with comedy, British comedy. It just wasn't my personal taste, essentially. However, it was fun. It was enjoyable. I don't regret reading it, but I have no interest reading any of the other books, basically. So I guess that's the best way to talk about it is I enjoyed it, but not enough to read any of the follow-up books. And this one is about a guy named, I forget his name now, but he's on Earth, but then the Earth is destroyed and he goes up with this other guy who's an alien but looks human, and just exploring the universe. And it's very, what is the meaning of life kind of a thing, while just being a fun, witty, clever British humor kind of story. Number 7 on the list is Matchstick Men, which I actually bought. So here's my first edition copy of Matchstick Men. It was a former library copy, but I personally am not bothered by that. That doesn't deter me from buying a book, obviously. This is a first edition. That's what matters to me, is that it's a first edition and it has the dust jacket. So yeah, so here's my first edition copy of Matchstick Men. And this one, I guess I'll hold it up, but this one was fun and I enjoyed it, and it was well written, and you see things from the perspective of just one character. You don't really see much into the other characters, but I really enjoyed the character of Roy and how his character arc through the course of this story. And there are scenes where, he's having anxiety or something and you really feel it. And there's a lot of humorous scenes here as well, similar to the movie if you've seen the movie. But I feel like this story, whether you're reading the book or watching the movie, especially with the book, because the movie is really well done. Anyway, the ending is what really gets you, and that's what is like, wow, like that's what'll stick with you. And because I went into this book already having seen the movie, the ending didn't pack the punch it would have had I not known the end. So if I read this book not knowing what was going to happen, I would have rated it higher, because the ending is amazing. But it's just that I went into it already knowing the ending, and so it did kind of take away from the experience, which isn't always the case. I've read other books where I knew the twist, or I knew the reveal, or, I knew it was going to happen, and yet I still enjoyed it so much. Whereas this one, I enjoyed it, but yeah, anyway, it was ranked a little lower because of that. But it is a book about con artists, and that is just a fun genre, just learning, and it's fictional, but so just learning about con men, matchstick men, flim-flam men. So it was fun and I enjoyed it. I just think I would have enjoyed it even more had I not known the ending. Number 6 on the list is the one that I feel is pretty low. On one hand, I want to put it up higher, but I don't know. This is probably a 3.5 star read. Once again, all of these so far have been like 3.5 stars. And that is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. So many people love this book so much. And I did really enjoy it. 3.5 stars isn't bad. For me, though, it just worked better as a movie, which my book versus movie comparison for this will be out on April 13th, I believe. And I had a hard time connecting with the character of the man in particular. And so I just didn't feel as invested in him as I would have liked. And there were times where I was maybe a little bored, not bored enough that I stopped reading or that I skimmed pages. Like I read the whole thing through. Yeah, it just wasn't my personal taste, ultimately. I did love the ending. So the ending made up for some of the times when I thought, when I wasn't quite as invested. So I would still recommend it to people. It's not like a book that has a special place in my heart from now on. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, like I'm glad I read it. And yeah, I don't want to get too detailed with some of these reviews because I talk about it in detail in my book versus movie comparison. So this is kind of a sneak peek into that, into why maybe I didn't love it or why I did love others. But anyway, it just worked better as a movie for me. So I'll just say right now, I like the movie better than the book. Number 5 is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This is one that is popular, like it's read a lot in high schools, and I totally understand why. It was written in the 1930s. At the time I was reading it, I was thinking it was written in like the 90s or early 2000s for some reason. And when I found out it was written in the 30s, it made me like it so much more. If this had been written like in today's age, I would have ranked it lower. But because it was written in the 30s, it made me have a higher respect for it. And again, this is one where the main character is Janie, and so we're just following her as she lives her life and tries to find romance, I guess, and find herself. That's the more important thing. With her, again, I just felt a hard time connecting to her character. I cared what was happening to her, but I didn't feel as invested as I would have liked. Also, honestly, the way the dialogue is written just takes away from the story. In my opinion, it takes time to get used to it. Like I was maybe like over a quarter of the way through before it was easier to read. It was just too distracting and it took me out of the moment. It's supposed to put you in the moment because it's written how people were talking. But instead it took me out of the moment because I was like having to focus more and figure out what these people are saying. And so the dialogue was a big reason why I'm putting it lower, as well as the fact that I didn't feel super invested in the character of Janie. Having said that, I do understand why it's read in high schools, and I think it's a good one for high schoolers to read, I suppose. Number 4 is Deep Water by Patricia Highsmith. 4 for Deep Water seems kind of high. But again, this is one where if it was written in today's time, I would have rated it lower. But because this was written in the 50s, it makes me have a greater admiration for it because Patricia Highsmith was writing these suburban thrillers. Nowadays, we get those all the time, and it's so common to read another suburban thriller about, a married couple, whereas this one was one of the earlier ones, as far as I know. And Gillian Flynn was inspired by Patricia Highsmith, and so you can definitely see that there. And I did really enjoy the characters, especially Vic. We get the perspective from the husband, Vic. I thought he was a great character. I loved reading things from his perspective, and he was so weird, and he prided himself on being different too. And so he was a really intriguing character that I enjoyed reading about. And the premise too was just really interesting. The movie recently came out on Hulu, so that's why I read it, and I did like the book better than the movie. And the endings are very different. The ending of the book was maybe a little predictable, but I still enjoyed it. And yeah, it was a great thriller. And once again, number 3 and 2, I had a hard time knowing which to put 3 and which to put 2. But number 3, I decided to go with A Touch of Jen by Beth Morgan, I believe. This one I finished just the other day, so it's still fresh in my mind. And one of the reasons I rated this higher, and I was even tempted to put it as number 2, was because it is a book I definitely plan on reading a second time. So that right there, if I'm willing to read it a second time, then that's saying something. It was really interesting. So I read the premise, and it was about like a couple who's obsessed with this woman on social media, and so I thought that sounded interesting. But what I didn't realize, along with being a commentary on social media, it's also kind of a commentary on the self-help culture, and so both of those aspects of it I found really interesting. I will say like around 50% to like 75% of the way through, there was a chunk there where it seemed like things were moving a bit slow, and it is a slow burn, but still it seemed like I was just wondering like, where is this going? What's gonna happen? It seemed like it wasn't moving fast enough. And so I started getting bored. However, I kept reading because if you read reviews for this book online, everybody talks about how there's like, it takes a huge turn and things get crazy. And so I kept waiting for that to happen. It does happen, but it doesn't happen until like the 80% mark. I read this on my Kindle, but it happens really close to the end. And so I was surprised how long it took for things to get crazy. But things do get, crazy and kind of weird, but I enjoyed it. Like I said, it's one I want to read a second time because going into it already having read the book, reading it a second time, I'll be able to pick up on some other things and maybe understand a lot of the symbolism and the meaning behind it. And this is one where I already have a lot of thoughts about it. And so after I read it a second time, I think I'm going to make a whole video talking about it. And if you've read this book and you like that idea and you would like me to make a video, comment down below. That way I will be even more likely to do it if I know people want to see it. But yeah, this is one I would recommend. I wouldn't recommend it to just anybody, I guess, but people compare this to like Ingrid Goes West and kind of like the book Bunny and kind of like, Metamorphosis by Kafka. So it's sort of like a lot of those things mixed together. So if that sounds like, that's up your alley, you should definitely give this one a read. It came out just last year, so it's pretty new. So yeah, I enjoyed it. It is a slow burn, especially at past the halfway point. Things happened I didn't expect to happen, but it still just felt slow at that point. I would still recommend it. gave it 4 stars. Maybe after a second read, I would rate it higher or maybe lower. We'll see. And number 2 is Children of the New World by Alexander Weinstein. And this one, like I said, I had a hard time knowing if this should be number 2 or number 3, but I'm putting it as number 2. It is a collection of short stories. It never drags because they're short stories, but they are all written in this futuristic world. They all focus on children in some way or another. And it's primarily about how technology, impacts our lives. And if you like the show Black Mirror, I think you would love this book. It's very Black Mirror-esque. I read this because the first book is called After Yang, and that short story was turned into a movie, which was available on Showtime. And I was only going to read After Yang, but I enjoyed After Yang so much that I ended up reading all of the stories. I loved them all. They were fascinating. Like, he just created this futuristic world really well with these short stories, not giving you, he doesn't elaborate too much at times, but you get a look into it enough. And some of them were just the plot, like the premise of it was so good, so crazy, and so sad at times. And yeah, each story was just so well written, and I loved each one. Some of them are darker than others, but it was fantastic. Again, if you love Black Mirror, I think you would love this. He has another book about like love in the new world or something, so I definitely plan on reading that one at some point as well. So yeah, if you love futuristic sci-fi, then I think you would really like this one. And the stories do progress in time. Like the first story is like the more recent future, and then as the story goes on, it's like the furthest future by the end. And yeah, again, they were all so good and so different, yet they still had a similar enough thread that they belonged together in this book of short stories. But yeah, each one was still different enough, and yeah, I loved it. And now you know what the number 1 book is, and that is Kindred by Octavia Butler. This one is considered like the first sci-fi novel written by a Black woman. However, the only sci-fi aspect of it is that it's time travel. So I went into it expecting there to be something more sci-fi-esque, but it's just the time travel aspect of it. But I really enjoyed it. It was fantastic. As soon as I finished it, I knew it was 5 stars. I actually listened to this on audio, and as I was listening to it, I was just loving it. If I had been physically reading this, like, you could read it pretty quick. So it covers heavy topics because the woman travels back in time to the 1800s when slavery was happening. And so there's some tough stuff, tough things that happen, and some really heartbreaking things that happen. But it's still like it could be a quick read. And the main antagonist in this book, which I heard is going to be turned into a TV show. So I don't know when that's happening, but that'll be really cool. Anyway, the main antagonist in this book is so horrible. Like, they do a good job at showing not just the physical abuse that slaves went through, but also the like emotional and mental abuse, the gaslighting and the manipulation, and just how they messed with, their minds, their heads. And the ending, I loved the ending so much. There was like with one character, like as I was starting the book, with one character in particular, I was like, okay, she can go like 2 different ways with this character. And I did like the path she chose to go with this character in particular. And I thought the ending was perfect. I really loved it. It's a really well-written book, and I would highly recommend it, which, we talked about Their Eyes Were Watching God is one people will read in high school. And I feel like this could be a good one to read in high schools too. And I actually recently bought the Folio Society edition of this. So it is right here, really cool slipcase cover. And then we have the front, which is very fitting because she has a connection to a slave owner in the 1800s because it's her like ancestor. And so that's kind of what that cover is representing. And she has no control over the time travel either. Like when she goes back, and this was also written in the 70s, by the way. So when she goes back between the 70s and the 1800s, like she doesn't really have control over that. So good. I loved it so much. I was always wanting to know what was going to happen next. And I really enjoyed the characters. Like I felt connected to them. The main character, I felt invested in her and her journey. And then the antagonist was a very well-written antagonist. And now time to decide, is Kindred better than Power of the Dog? And so I finished this book like 2 weeks ago. And as I said, my first thought was 5-star read, incredible. It'll be hard to top this month. And no book did top it this month. This was number 1. And my second thought was, is it better than Power of the Dog? Because I knew I was going to be filming this video and comparing the 2 of them. So I've had a few weeks now to think about this since I read it a while ago. They both are amazing characters, amazing story, fantastic endings. Both of them kept me intrigued. Power of the Dog was more of a slow burn, I would say, but it wasn't a slow burn where I was bored. It was a slow burn, but I was always so invested. Kindred, not a slow burn. That one, it has a quicker pace, but ultimately I having to choose one or the other, I am going to say that Power of the Dog is still the winner. I think it ultimately is a better written book. I think all of the characters in Kindred are really fleshed out and you get a feel for all of them. But something about Power of the Dog, the characters in that were just even more intriguing, I think. And like each one of the main characters just had so much to them. And I think Power of the Dog was more transporting for me, where when I was reading, I just felt like I was there. Where Kindred, I was listening to that on audio, so I would listen to it while I was running. So that, maybe it's not fair to say it, because maybe if I had been reading it, I would have felt that transporting effect just as much. So yeah, maybe that makes it harder to judge between the two. This was a great audiobook, by the way, Kindred, so great narrator. And both of them, yeah, the endings are both incredible in both, but I think the ending of Power of the Dog, like, shocked me more. It just left me being like, wow, like, I was thinking about it for a long time after. Kindred will definitely stick with you as well, but ultimately I still think I like Power of the Dog better, so it is still the champion of 2022 so far. If you want to check out my other monthly wrap-ups, I will link to them down below. Power of the Dog, it was just so good. At some point I'll probably reread it, because if it keeps winning, I'm gonna need to reread it to make sure it deserves to keep winning. It was an amazing book, so Kindred was amazing too, though. I don't want to like undersell Kindred because it was fantastic. For me, though, I think Power of the Dog just was the whole package. Yeah, that's what I'm going to say is Power of the Dog is still the winner. And thank you guys for watching this video. Let me know if you have read any of these books and what you think of them. If you haven't read these books, but now you're intrigued by some of them, let me know down below which ones you want to read now. If you have read Touch of Jen, comment down below if you want me to do a follow-up video where I talk all about it and all like the symbolism and the meanings. I will wait to do that one until I've read it a second time, though, that way I can really do the video justice. And if you've read It Ends With Us, and if you love it or hate it, let me know. Let me know if it's worth my time to read it. And yeah, I guess that's it. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video, and check out my other Book First movie content, as well as my book collection content, which, as you can see, I have some beautiful books and I talk about them in different videos. So yeah, thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.